Hey everyone, don't forget to leave a comment letting us know what you thought about the stories and the narration. We really want to hear your feedback to keep improving and bringing you more chilling content. Now, get ready. Let's dive into the stories. It had been weeks since I ended my relationship. After everything I went through with him, the feeling of freedom was both liberating and terrifying. Getting out of an abusive relationship had left scars I was still learning to deal with, but now I was trying to move forward. I decided to try something new, so I signed up for a dating app. The online conversations with strangers were awkward at first, but soon I met someone who seemed genuine. His name was Mark, or at least that's what he said. He had a kind way about him in the messages, seemed to respect my boundaries, and genuinely showed interest in getting to know me. We arranged to meet. He suggested a quiet, more private restaurant, which made me a little uneasy, but I decided to trust him. Maybe it was the kind of place perfect for a relaxed date, without the pressure of a crowded spot. Still, something bothered me, a subtle sense that something was off, but I thought it was just nerves. It was my first date since the breakup, and honestly, my self-confidence was shaken. Maybe I just need to relax, I thought as I got ready for the date. The restaurant was in a part of town I didn't visit much. When I checked the location on the map, I realized it was in a more isolated area, which only increased my discomfort. Even so, I finished getting ready, put on a simple dress, something casual, and left. I tried to push away the growing tension, telling myself it was just the normal nerves of starting something new. When I arrived at the restaurant, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The lighting was dim, the place was almost empty, and the few people there seemed completely uninterested in one another. The tables looked a bit worn, and the air carried the smell of greasy food that was far from inviting. I sat down at one of the tables near the window, trying to ignore the strange atmosphere. I received a message from Mark. He said he was on his way and asked for a bit of patience. I took a deep breath and tried to focus on something positive. Maybe I was overreacting, right? It was just a more discreet restaurant, without the distractions of a crowded place. Time seemed to pass slowly, and as I watched the few people around, I felt that the place only heightened my anxiety. The door to the restaurant opened and closed a few times, but none of the customers looked like the man I was expecting. My heart began to race when the door opened again and, finally, someone walked in. I looked up cautiously, ready to meet Mark, but my smile froze. Standing in front of me was my ex-boyfriend. The shock hit me like a punch in the gut. This couldn't be happening. Was I seeing things? But it was him. Definitely him. He approached the table with a smile that made my skin crawl. Without asking, he sat in the chair across from me, as if we were just continuing where we left off. For a moment, I was completely frozen, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "Surprise," he said casually, as if this were some kind of joke. I couldn't find the words. What was he doing here? And why did he look so calm, as if this were normal? "I knew you wouldn't agree to see me if you knew it was me," he continued, crossing his arms with unsettling confidence. "So I made a fake profile. It was the only way to talk to you again." My mind was racing in 1,000 directions. He had tricked me. He created a fake profile, lured me to an isolated spot, and now he was here, sitting just inches away, looking at me as if nothing was wrong. Fear started to creep in, but I tried to hold it together. I couldn't show panic. You shouldn't be here," I finally said, my voice shaky. "This is insane. You can't do this." He tilted his head, a cold smile forming on his lips. "I can do whatever I need to get you back. We were perfect together, remember? I just need a chance to prove it to you." His words made me feel like I was trapped in a nightmare. He wasn't here to talk or resolve things peacefully. He was here to control me again, to regain the power I had taken from him when I left. This empty restaurant, the isolated location, it was all part of a plan. I tried to stay calm, but inside, my heart was racing. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. He had always been unpredictable, and I didn't know how far he would go. I needed a way out, but fear kept me rooted in place. I knew that at any moment, he could become violent. The way he looked at me, the calm in his voice, everything indicated he was on the edge of something dangerous. I had to think fast. Maybe we should talk more, but in a different place, I suggested, forcing a smile. This place is a bit weird, and I think it'd be better if we went somewhere more public. He laughed, a short, harsh sound, as if my suggestion was ridiculous. I don't think so. This place is perfect. Just the two of us, no interruptions. His words had a sinister weight that made me shiver. My mind was spinning, searching for an escape. The doors were too far away, and if I made any sudden moves, he would notice. I was cornered, and he knew it. As he continued talking about how much he had changed and improved, my heart pounded in my chest. I pretended to listen, nodding occasionally, but with each word, the tension grew tighter around me like an invisible noose. I needed a plan. But what? The opportunity came when a waiter passed by. I raised my hand quickly and asked for the bill, pretending that our date was coming to an end. My ex-boyfriend hesitated for a second, as if considering whether this was part of some game. When the waiter brought the bill, I seized the moment of distraction. "I need to go to the restroom," I said, standing up quickly. He watched me, without reacting. This was my chance. As soon as I stood up, I felt the weight of his gaze following me. My breath was caught in my throat as I made my way to the restroom. Every step felt like a calculated risk, and I knew he could act at any moment. When I reached the restroom door, I turned slowly for one last glance. He was sitting, watching my every move, but he didn't follow. Maybe he truly thought I was just going to the bathroom, that I wouldn't try to escape. With my heart racing, I pushed open the restroom door and entered. I looked around, desperately searching for an exit. There was a small window above the sink. It was high, but it was my only chance. Without hesitation, I climbed onto the toilet and, with all my strength, pushed the window open. The cold night air hit me as I squeezed through the narrow opening. Outside, my body trembled with adrenaline. I knew he could notice my absence at any moment. When my feet finally touched the ground outside, I started running. I ran without looking back, not knowing if he was following. I managed to reach a safe place where I hid and, with trembling hands, dialed 911. My mind was still in shock, trying to process what had just happened. How could he have gone to such insane lengths? After explaining the situation to the authorities, I sat on the curb, waiting for someone to come. My whole body shook, not just from the cold but from the fear that still consumed me. I was free, but the trauma of the night was far from gone. The police arrived, and I finally felt safe. My ex-boyfriend was arrested, but even so, I knew it wouldn't be easy to forget this night. He hadn't just tried to win me back. He had almost trapped me again in his sick web. Now, all that was left was to rebuild my life. Once again, I never thought windows could scare me. They're supposed to bring light into your home, to give you a view of the world outside. But that window, the one in the corner of my living room, always made me feel strangely uncomfortable. I had been living alone for years, and I loved the independence. But lately, something felt off. I had started keeping the curtains closed most of the time, as if I instinctively knew there was something out there I didn't want to see. My routine was simple: wake up, work, and spend some time on dating apps before bed. Meeting new people, even virtually, was a way to break the boredom of living alone. But in recent days, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, studying me from a distance. Maybe it was just paranoia, or maybe not. I tried to ignore it, keeping myself busy. But whenever that window came into my line of sight, the discomfort returned, like a small prick that wouldn't go away. Looking at it felt like opening a door to something I preferred to keep locked away. Most of my conversations on the dating app were fleeting, flirty exchanges that never went anywhere. But one guy stood out. His name was Jake, and he was mysterious. Something about him intrigued me. From the beginning, He asked a lot of questions about me. Where I worked, what I liked to do, my favorite spots in the city. At first, it seemed natural, but over time, I noticed he never shared much about himself. Whenever I asked about his life, he skillfully changed the subject. It started to bother me. Who was he, really? Why did he want to know so much about me but reveal so little in return? My friend Megan had always warned me about the dangers of dating apps. You never know who's on the other side of the screen, she'd say. Maybe she was right, but I couldn't pull away. There was something about Jake that kept me hooked. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing unease. Sometimes, it felt like he knew more than he should, like he was extracting information from me without me even realizing it. I tried to shake off the tension during our conversations, but I kept being drawn back to that mystery. Was it curiosity or danger? During one of our chats, I casually mentioned a new restaurant in town that I was excited to try. Maybe I'll go there next weekend, I said, without thinking much of it. A few hours later, Jake sent me a message that made me uneasy. Maybe I'll see you there sometime. He didn't suggest a date. He just threw the comment out there, which left me feeling like he was silently invading my decisions. I shrugged it off. It was probably just a coincidence. Popular restaurants attract a lot of people, after all. But that weekend, when I walked into the restaurant for dinner with a friend, my blood froze. There, sitting alone at a table in the corner, was Jake. The shock hit me instantly. He didn't say a word, didn't come over, but his eyes followed me the entire time, like I was the only reason he was there. We had never planned to meet in person, and the whole thing deeply unsettled me. I tried to enjoy dinner with my friend, but I couldn't relax. The feeling of being watched weighed down on me like a heavy blanket. As I left the restaurant, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. Was this really just a coincidence, or was Jake deliberately following me? After that night, the unease only grew. Jake became a constant presence, even when he wasn't physically around. He seemed to know more about me than I had ever told him. In one of our conversations, he mentioned the local grocery store I shopped at, a place I'd never brought up before. His messages became more intrusive, filled with comments about my daily routine that left me wondering how he knew so much. You seem to enjoy your afternoon walks in the park, he remarked one day, and I froze. I did take walks in the park, but I had never told him that. The sensation of being watched started to creep into my every move. I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe he was just observant. Maybe I was overreacting. But the tension inside me grew with every new comment he made. And then came the breaking point. That afternoon, I was at home, wearing a dress I rarely wore. I hadn't left the house all day. Suddenly, I got a message from Jake. "I like the dress you're wearing today." My heart pounded in my chest. How could he know? I looked around, half expecting to see him hiding somewhere in my apartment, but I was alone. That window, the one I always avoided opening, now seemed like the most vulnerable part of my home. The feeling that someone was out there watching me became almost unbearable. At that moment, I knew something was seriously wrong. Jake wasn't just someone asking too many questions. He was watching me, and I had no idea how long it had been going on. After that message, I knew I had to do something. I decided the only way to end this was to confront him directly. I arranged to meet Jake. The whole time, my nerves were on edge, wondering what might happen. When I arrived at the meeting spot, he was already there, as if he knew exactly when I would show up. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. It sent chills down my spine. We sat down, and before I could even speak, he pulled a small envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. "You've always been curious, haven't you, Emma?" he said, his voice calm and unsettling. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside were several photos. Photos of me, taken from inside my house. The angles were perfect, as if he had been right outside, watching me through the window. My stomach turned. He knew. He had always known where I was, what I was doing. Panic flooded me. I shot up from the table, not saying a word. I ran out of the restaurant and didn't look back. He didn't follow, but his calm, cold stare stayed with me. That night, I reported Jake to the police, but by the time they went to the meeting spot, he had vanished. I gave them all the details I could, but they seemed skeptical. They said they'd look into it, but I knew deep down that Jake had planned this all too perfectly. I tried to return to normal life. I moved to a new city, cut off all contact with the dating apps. But every time I stepped outside, I felt the weight of those photos, the way he knew everything about me, and the feeling of always being watched. Even now, in my new apartment, with the windows always covered, the feeling of being observed never quite left me. Sometimes, as I walk down the street, I swear I can feel someone's eyes on me. I look around, trying to find a familiar face, but he's never there. But I know he's out there somewhere, watching, waiting. He always knew how to find me, and maybe he still does. I was never the kind of guy who excelled at dating, but after much insistence from a coworker, I decided to give it a shot. He convinced me to try a dating app, something I would normally avoid. To my surprise, the conversation with a woman named Sarah flowed better than expected. It didn't take long for us to arrange a date at a quiet cafe downtown. However, the moment I saw her, something felt off. She seemed normal, even attractive, but there was something unsettling about her demeanor. Maybe it was the way her eyes avoided mine, or the fact that her responses felt rehearsed, almost robotic. The atmosphere in the cafe didn't help either. Normally bustling with people, it was strangely empty that night. As she talked about her job, my mind began to drift. I tried to focus, but my discomfort grew with each passing minute. When I suggested we wrap things up, she gave me a strange smile, as if she knew something I didn't. I quickly said goodbye and left, determined not to see her again. The following days were eerily quiet. My routine returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The date with Sarah wasn't traumatic by any means, but it left me with a lingering sense of unease, as if I had narrowly avoided something I couldn't quite understand. I started noticing things out of place around my apartment. Nothing drastic at first. A glass in the sink I was sure I'd put away. The bedroom door I always kept shut slightly ajar. At first, I chalked it up to distraction. Things escalated when I received a message on my phone, but before I could read it, it vanished. I checked my history, searched every folder, but there was no trace of anyone having sent it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a glitch in the system, a bug. Technology malfunctions all the time. But in the back of my mind, that creeping sense of something being wrong wouldn't leave me. Something was definitely off. On the third day, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing non-stop. Without thinking, I reached for it and looked at the screen. A message popped up. It was from an unknown number. "I know what you did." Panic hit me instantly. Before I could respond or investigate further, the message disappeared, just like the others. I scoured my phone, trying to find any record of it. But again, nothing. Everything seemed to vanish the moment it appeared. I felt paranoid, but tried to carry on with my day. At work, I briefly mentioned the date to my coworker, without bringing up the messages. He laughed and joked that maybe I had dodged a bullet with a crazy person. The joke bothered me more than it should have. During lunch, I received another message, this time more specific. "You think you can escape?" The air around me seemed to thicken. The words on the screen felt suffocating, choking every attempt I made to think logically. I looked around, trying to mask my growing panic. Whoever this was, they knew things about me. They knew where I was, what I was doing. I tried to convince myself that this was just a cruel prank. Maybe a friend had gotten hold of my number and was trying to mess with me. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, my apartment became a place of uncertainty. I locked every door, every window, yet I still felt exposed. The sense that someone was there with me was undeniable, even though I was alone. I decided to check my phone one last time before bed, hoping for any sign of the messages that had haunted me throughout the day. Then, the phone buzzed. A new message. This time, it was a picture. A photo taken inside my apartment. It showed the living room, with all the lights off except for a single lamp in the corner. Exactly how I had left it. A chill ran down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest. I jumped out of bed and rushed to check the security cameras, desperately hoping nothing would appear. I reviewed every recording, but there was nothing. No movement, no intruders. Just the stillness of an empty apartment. I turned off the cameras, took a deep breath, and tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, but the feeling of vulnerability wouldn't leave me. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "You're closer than you think." I knew then that someone was inside. I locked the bedroom door and sat in the corner, knowing that the real terror was still to come. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving inside the apartment. My eyes shot open, and for a moment, I hoped it was just my imagination. But the sound came again, the faint shuffle of feet down the hallway. Someone was there. Panic surged through me as I rose from the bed, straining to hear every small noise. I grabbed my phone, though I had no hope of calling anyone. Whoever it was had already invaded my space. I moved silently toward the door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. I cracked open the door, and as I peeked down the hallway, I saw a shadow standing near the living room entrance. My blood turned cold. It was an indistinct figure, but something about the stance felt familiar. There was no longer any doubt. It was her, the woman from the date. "Did you think you could just ignore me?" Her voice was low, menacing, as she slowly moved toward me. I tried to run, but before I could react, she shoved me against the wall with surprising force. I hit the floor, dazed, as she approached. Her eyes were full of rage, and she mumbled things I could barely understand. Panic and terror clouded my mind, but my only option was to fight back. I managed to stand and, with all the strength I had, pushed her away. She stumbled, glaring at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over," she whispered before fleeing through the door, disappearing into the night. I survived, barely. The apartment was silent, but the feeling of being watched never left. Every sound at night made me jump from bed. Every shadow seemed to hide her. I tried to return to my routine, but it was pointless. She had left a scar that wouldn't fade. Even now, days later, I can't forget her words. "This isn't over. I don't know if she's coming back or if I'm finally free, but something deep inside me tells me the terror has only just begun." Nights had always been peaceful for Alex. In the quiet of his downtown apartment, he found the tranquility that his constant freelance graphic design work often denied him. Living alone, the small apartment became his sanctuary, where he could immerse himself in projects without distractions. But in recent weeks, something had changed. The once welcoming silence began to feel heavy, as if the very air inside his apartment had grown dense. Alex couldn't pinpoint the exact reason for this feeling. Maybe it was the comment a friend made recently about a rise in home invasions in the city. Or maybe it was the accumulated stress, worsened by small discomforts he'd been ignoring. For example, the guest room, a space he rarely used, felt different. Every time he walked past its door, a wave of unease washed over him. He avoided going in, convincing himself there was no need. The apartment was just the way he liked it. Windows locked, curtains drawn, and the only light coming from his computer screen. Still, the feeling that something was off remained, like a quiet shadow always lurking at the back of his mind. That night, as the clock struck midnight, the phone rang. Alex looked at the screen and frowned. It was an unknown number. It was late, and he wasn't expecting any calls. He decided to ignore it and return to the project he was working on. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Same number. The persistent ringing pulled him out of his focus. Frustrated, he reached for the phone but let the call drop before answering. That night was only the beginning. The following nights brought the same number calling at the same time, midnight. Alex tried to rationalize it as a mistake, someone dialing the wrong number. Still, there was something unsettling about the silence on the other end of the line. During the last few calls, when he picked up, there was only dead air. No voice, no response. Just silence. A silence so profound it felt heavy, as if there was someone on the other end, listening, waiting. The next night, Alex decided he couldn't ignore the calls anymore. When the phone rang at exactly 12 a.m., he took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" His voice was steady, but inside, he felt apprehensive. Just like before, silence filled the line. The silence was so complete that he could hear his own breathing, magnified by the tension. But this time, something different happened. A whisper, barely audible, broke the stillness. "You're wearing that blue shirt tonight, aren't you?" Alex froze, the blood in his veins turning cold. He looked down, and sure enough, he was wearing a blue shirt. How could anyone know that? He scanned the apartment, heart racing. All the windows were shut, the curtains blocking any possible view from outside. Who was speaking to him? And how did they know what he was wearing? "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The silence returned, followed by the click of the call ending. Alex stood there for a while, the phone still in his hand, as his body processed the growing fear. At that moment, he knew his home, once his sanctuary, was no longer safe. Whoever the unseen intruder was, they knew more about him than they should. The calls became a nightly ritual. Every night at exactly midnight, the phone rang. Alex began answering immediately, hoping to catch the caller off guard, but the pattern remained. Silence, followed by disturbing whispers. Each time, the voice revealed something more intimate. "You like sitting on that couch, don't you?" it said one night, describing exactly where Alex was sitting. Another time, the voice mentioned the light he had just turned off in the hallway. Alex started avoiding looking at certain parts of his apartment, fearing the intruder might be watching from somewhere. The guest room, which had always made him uneasy, now felt even more sinister. He didn't dare enter it. Every noise, every subtle change in the apartment put him on high alert. It was as if he were being hunted, and the anxiety was consuming his every thought. He called the police, but with nothing more than phone calls and a disturbing voice, they couldn't help. It was as if the intruder was playing a twisted game, enjoying every moment of tormenting him. Paranoia was growing inside Alex, and he could no longer tell what was real and what was the result of his mind unraveling. That night, Alex knew he had to act. The feeling of being watched was devouring him, and he was certain something was wrong with that apartment. The calls, the whispers, all pointed to the fact that the intruder was much closer than he had ever imagined. His decision came as a sudden impulse. He would enter the guest room, the place he had always avoided but now seemed to hold the key to the mystery. With the phone in his hand, he walked to the door. His hands shook as he turned the knob, a chill running down his spine as the cold air from inside the room hit him. Everything looked normal at first glance, but Alex knew something was wrong. The feeling was too intense to ignore. He started examining the room more closely, noticing small details out of place. A picture frame on the shelf was tilted, a habit he never had. A mug from the kitchen sat on the table, though he never left it there. Suddenly, his phone rang. Alex answered without even checking the number, and the voice whispered again. "I'm closer than you think." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He looked around frantically, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then it hit him. The calls weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside his own house. Desperate, Alex ran for the front door. He had to get out. The fear that the intruder was inside the apartment, maybe even in that guest room, was unbearable. He flung open the door and sprinted into the hallway of his building, finally able to breathe again. As soon as he reached the street, he called the police, unsure of what to say, only that he was in danger. When the officers arrived, they found nothing. No signs of a break-in, no evidence that anyone had been inside. The apartment was locked, secure. But Alex knew, he felt it deep inside, that something was terribly wrong. The calls continued even after he changed his number and moved to a new address. He switched phones, but the calls persisted, always at midnight, always with the same eerie silence followed by that cold whisper. Now, sitting in his new apartment, Alex stares at his phone. He doesn't need to answer to know who's on the other end. The feeling of being watched, of never truly being safe, never left him. Every night, the call comes, and with it, the fear that one day, the voice won't be just a whisper.